Hello, word nerds! The chat says that we are live, and I'm gonna spread this out a little bit because I know it always takes a handful of seconds for us to show up on YouTube, but we are here. It is Sunday, July 26th, and we are talking all about novel goals, what it takes to actually finish your book. So today we're going to be kind of doing like an overview of all the different steps of writing a book, and then also kind of breaking down how we figure out timing and everything, like what we personally do to get to the end of a book so that it's not just a never-ending work in progress, because that's always the worst. And so yeah, I'm going to preface this and probably throw this in a couple times throughout the chat that this is just super going to be what works for us. And if that works for you, then that's really good. And we really hope that it's helpful for you. But if it doesn't work for you, like, this is not prescriptive at all. This is just what we personally do. Everyone's processes are different. I'm sure all of our processes will be different as well, given just our different writing styles, and then also just being at different points in life and stuff. So there are a lot of things that can affect you getting to the end of your book. And yeah, this is what works for us. So we're going to be talking about 3 main steps of finishing a novel. There's going to be outlining, drafting, and revising. So we are going to just open it up with rank these 3 things. What's your most to least favorite of outlining, drafting, and revising? Let us know in the discussion section as well what your ranking is. And I've got Kelly first.
So it feels like I should be someone who likes outlining the most. I feel like I'm working towards that. But for now, it's drafting, outlining, several other steps, and then revisions.
Rachel?
I would actually say the opposite. I love outlining. I love coming up with ideas and brainstorming and even having that like, ooh, and then I'm going to have this twist and the reader's going to go wild. But then I have the drafting is like, what? I actually have to write it? What? It's like, it seems not fair. And then in very distant third, there is revising.
Emma?
Oh, man. Definitely outlining is number 1 for me. I enjoy that part so much that I don't want to move on to actually writing the book sometimes. And I like it so much that I continue outlining while I'm drafting the book a lot of the time. And then after that, I'm trying to decide whether drafting or revising. Probably revising would be number 2. Because it's, once again, it's kind of a little bit more organized, while drafting just feels like total chaos. And I'm not a huge fan of chaos. So.
Erin?
I guess I love chaos. I really like... Yeah, that's expected. I really, really like outlining, but I do have 2 different stages of outlining at this point. So I've got the more brainstorming part, and then the actual I write out a full synopsis before I draft, because I am such a big outliner, and I actually really hate the synopsis part. So I do not love that part of outlining, but the brainstorming section before I start outlining is my absolute favorite out of everything, the whole situation. And then drafting is second for me. And then in I'm same as Emma. I think she said way behind everything else. Is that no? You said you liked it.
Was Kelly. Yeah, it was Kelly.
Kelly. Yeah, I hate editing with a fiery, burning passion. So,
so revising is my favorite. I guess that's a weird one here. For me, I like that I can break it down and be really scientific about it. It's if I do A plus B, I'm going to end up with C, which is a better book than the one that I had already. I really, really, really like that. And probably second is outlining. Third is drafting. I don't hate it, but I just constantly feel do I even know what I'm doing during the drafting period? And every other time, it's even in revising, when I feel really tied up and do I know what I'm doing? It's a different kind of do I know what I'm doing? It's maybe I don't know how to fix this yet, and I'm going to figure it out. Drafting, it's maybe I don't know how to write a book. Who knows?
Yeah.
See, that's the part I feel like I know how to do, that I always, like in the drafting stage, I know what I'm supposed to do. Write the book. It's the other ones that are, okay, what's in the book? And then, okay, I have the book. I'm not sure how it's broken, but I'm going to hack away at it and try to make it better, I guess.
Yeah.
See,
I'm the
I
same way.
appreciate having something to hack apart and make better, but like it's the whole something from nothing. So like I enjoy like the early stages of like, oh, I have this fun idea and I get to like come up with more stuff to go with it. But then like actually having to like put that on paper is the worst.
It's funny that like Megan versus Kelly, like the feelings you guys have are the feelings you like fight. No, the feelings you guys have in the different rounds of different steps essentially is very interesting because and I'm the same way. It's the feeling of I don't know what I'm doing that makes me really dread that step. And the step of I don't know what I'm doing comes for me when I'm editing. And when I'm drafting, I'm the same as Kelly. I'm like, I know what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to be writing this book and I have this outline that I've done already. Right. So I really know what I'm supposed to be doing. So there's no like existential dread of like, do I even know how to write? What am I even doing until I get to the edits?
And maybe that's a little different because I don't fully plot my entire
Right.
books. I only plot like the last half of it lately. And so like for the first half of it, I'm kind of just like figuring things out, getting to know everyone, getting to know the setting. And so there are a lot more opportunities to like deviate and get stuck somewhere and then have to take a couple steps back. But once I'm revising, it's like I have the blueprint. I've made a second blueprint that is in the right shape that I want.
I feel with revising, I always end up when I go back to the beginning of the book, it's always like, oh, I forgot about all these things that I originally wrote, or like, oh, I wrote notes for myself going through, and oh my gosh, I completely forgot that I have to rewrite this whole scene, and then it kind of gets overwhelming, and then like it's just so many things I have to redo that I'm like, I don't want to. I'll just write a new one. That's what we do here.
I think part of it as well, though, is Erin and I are very fast drafters. So it's not this like endless, you're stuck in it forever thing. Whereas for me, outlining and revisions, it's like you don't really know when you're done. Whereas drafting, you got a beginning, you got an end. Just filling everything in between. Doesn't take years. So
That's very true.
Sometimes drafting takes me years.
yeah.
Yeah, we'll get to that in the drafting section. That's a question I have. But we'll move into more outlining. And I called it outlining in my like plan of my very abbreviated plan for tonight's chat. But really, I feel like outlining is just any form of the pre-drafting phase. And so like, even if you're not a hardcore, will let me study plot structure, you do some amount of work most likely before you sit down and start writing. You're not like, I'm going to write a new book and I'm just going to figure it out. Like I'm sitting down, I have nothing and I'm going to start. I'm sure there's someone out there who will be in the comments later like I do that. But for the most part, people have at least something. And so I'm curious, how much do you all figure out? Erin, you said already like full synopsis. How much do the rest of you figure out before you actually start drafting?
I'm just going to pop in and say that we had our live chat last week all about outlining and what have you. So if anybody wants to know more about that, you can go look that up.
In our Evergreen Oasis chat that Rachel and I were in. And that's on Tamara Woods' channel too.
Yes.
I'm realizing lately that like I don't feel like either a plotter or a pantser. Like I've only had one book that I had a full outline for, and on that one I actually had like a writing coach helping me through it. But I've never written a book of like, I don't know where this is going. Like I always go in knowing the major plot points, having a good sense of characters. I just haven't written anything down, and I need to, and there's things I need to flesh out. But I always go into it having a pretty good idea of everything that's going to happen. It's just the nuance of it I don't know.
I have to have like a frame, so I know like where it starts, I know the ending, I know like the midpoint, and like some of the other like major plot points. I have to figure those out to get kind of like the shape of the arc, and so that I can kind of know like what I'm heading towards. And then I mostly just kind of have like a lot of just very scattered ideas a lot of the time about like the character's arc and the plot and the things I want to happen, and like which like because I break my book into quarters. So like which quarter of the book those things are going to happen in. And then as I go, I'll like plot out about like 10 to 15 like scenes at a time and write those.
Do you guys do any other inspiration things? Like you do Pinterest boards, Spotify playlists, anything like that?
I do both those.
Pinterest for sure.
Yeah.
I also do before I start drafting, and usually somewhere in between, like I may be like halfway through my intense outline. I will start reading books and watching movies that are in the same, like not necessarily like the same exact like subject, but at least the same tone. So like for the Druid book I'm writing now, because there's this like weird blight/plague thing that's happening. I'm going to rewatch Annihilation. I'm rereading Wilder Girls. I just ordered Mexican Gothic because I have been hearing that has similar creepy things. So anything like that gives me the same vibe. So
I have so many feelings about it. Everyone to live snap me while they're reading it.
Yes. Yeah, I love making Pinterest boards, but like they also like at some point in the drafting process, they always end up stressing me out because I'll like go back and be like, oh, let me go like get re-inspired. I look at my board and I start looking at it and I'm like, my book doesn't fit this like totally. I didn't actually like make what I set out to make, and I get stressed about that. But that's a lot of my like drafting stress is like realizing partway through when I look back at my notes, being like, oh, all these like things I had intended that like I feel like I've totally missed, you know.
Yeah.
But it's always going to be like that. Like I definitely do that too. And then I have to like talk myself down and be like, this happens every single time. It's fine. It's never going to match what was in my head.
See, I love having it. I almost always have my Pinterest board pulled up because I have a dual monitor situation. So I'll have the Pinterest board pulled up in one and then my document up on the other because it helps me feel like recentered. It's like, yes, this is the feel I want. And so then like if I'm feeling uninspired, I'll like look and be like, what can I pull from and put in right now? Yeah, I'm really big into like Pinterest aesthetic boards, if you couldn't tell. So I definitely usually I start making one of those after I have a solid list of notes about like what I want the book to be, because I keep a note in my phone. And once I have enough things that I'm like, oh, this could be its own idea, because I have like a huge list of all my ideas. And then once I'm like, this has enough to be its own idea, it gets its own note. And for the most part, it's like a back of the mind thing while I'm working on other things. And if I have an idea for that, I'll just throw it in there. And then once I have an idea for an opening line, and then once I know what all the characters want, that's when I kind of sit down and think more seriously about, okay, well, what do I want my ending to be shaped like? Because I don't necessarily figure out all of the details of my ending beforehand, but I need to know where they're headed. And then I almost always pick a midpoint, like something big is going to happen at the midpoint, because I need that thing to work to while I figure everything else out. How long does this like outlining, this pre-drafting phase typically last for y'all?
It varies book to book for sure.
Yeah, I think it depends how excited I am or like how much I go into this new idea already knowing. Because sometimes I'll have that idea that's like, oh, like something floaty by, and I'm like, oh, it'd be kind of cool. Maybe I'll think about that for a while. And sometimes it's like getting hit with a car. You're like, oh, I have all these great ideas for characters in this one scene, this world, and it just kind of depends.
Yeah, it depends on like what I count as the beginning of that phase. Because sometimes, kind of like Rachel was describing, sometimes I'll just like have this idea for like a world or something, like a concept, or like, oh, I want to retell this fairy tale in this way or something like that. And I have that written down, and sometimes it's like years later that I actually get around to writing it because all I have is a concept. I don't have anything else. And so it's just kind of like percolating for a long time, and I'm like writing down ideas as I have them. Where other times, yeah, it's like I have an idea, and as soon as I finish what I'm currently working on, I start on it because like it develops so quickly.
Yeah, I'm the same as Emma. Sometimes it can percolate for like, I don't know. I haven't had anything percolate for over a year, but like it's just little drips and drabs of things while I'm working on something else. And then, but once I'm like, okay, now let's do this, it's probably about a week to 2 weeks that I'm like intensely brainstorming. But by then it's like a fair amount of things have snowballed into like an actual idea. So
Yeah, that was going to be my follow-up question was like, okay, well, once you know that this is an idea that could be a whole book, like how much time do you spend before you're
like 2
just like,
weeks.
forget it, let's do it.
Yeah.
For like
Yeah.
1 to 2 months for me, I'd say.
Yeah. Yeah, probably like a 2 to 3 weeker.
And I'll also like in those couple of months, I'll attempt starting it. So like I'll like write a first scene and they'll be like, okay, that isn't right. That isn't quite what I'm going for. And then I'll like go back to kind of like the drawing board and work on it some more. And then like, so like I'm trying to like get that tone and like the character's voice and everything while I'm also plotting and outlining.
Yeah. Excuse me. Hello to everyone in the comments. We had a question from Penumbra Mind at Aaron, because you mentioned consuming media that has the same vibe as the thing that you want to write next. So they asked, do you ever worry about world bleed, like that what you're watching or reading will contaminate the world you're creating?
Well, normally I want it to contaminate it. Like I want that same tone. And often I will not, I don't want to say that I won't be reading or watching things during my drafting process, but my drafting process is also short, like Kelly was saying. Like I draft in about a month and a bit, maybe. So in that time, I'm usually like so into the draft that I don't have as much time for reading. So usually there is no like chance of that happening. But yeah, I do want, like, I want a certain amount of that to bleed in. I want there to have that tone. And some of the time I'll even be like, yeah, I'm really inspired by this character. I want her to have the same feel as this character. And you know, as long as there's no outright like copying, my goal is like, it should feel a bit like that, but no one should be able to look at that and be like, yeah, this is this character from this show, you know?
Yeah, Kyra's actually inspired me to try that on purpose a bit. She was saying she'd been listening to so much YA contemporary, and then she wrote this amazing YA contemporary draft because the voice was just so in her head of like, not her voice or a character voice, but just how to write a good YA contemporary had just been ingrained in her. And I don't like, I'm sure there's an extent of that can be done reading as well as audiobook, but audiobook has just a way of, like she was saying, her inner monologue sounded a bit like she was narrating a YA contemporary book, which was just really cool.
Yeah, I will get that if I was just gonna say, I'll get that if I watch too much of a show, and then one of the main characters or whatever will be like in my head narrating things, and I'm like, great, this is the time to write that character that I want to sound like this, you know?
Yeah, I was gonna say like voice and like the prose's tone are the things that are most likely to bleed over for me. It's not like the world itself or like the mood or the characters or anything, because I think I'm more conscious of that, especially if you've read or watched something recently, you're going to be conscious of like, oh yeah, I don't want, like that's too close to this other thing. But it is like more the voice and tone that bleeds over. Like if I've been like watching a lot of British television, like my characters start sounding more British in my head. So that's the thing I have to be really careful about, is like the voice and tone changing in the middle of the book because I've been watching a lot of something or reading a lot of something.
Yeah. And so once again, this is obviously just what works for all of us. Just because Erin starts writing within a week doesn't mean that that'll necessarily be what's best for you. We're just hoping to give some like general timelines and talk about our own processes. And then maybe that can help you as you're deciding to, you know, set your goals so that you end up finishing your novel. So we've kind of did anyone have anything else they wanted to say about outlining or like pre-writing? Like what's the last thing that you're like, okay, that's it, we're done, we're starting, I guess, will be the final question there. When you're like, I'm not drafting anymore, I'm not outlining anymore, I'm writing.
For me, it is literally, I've already wasted too much time. I ended up writing nothing down and I have to do this now. So
I have to have an opening scene that I feel like pretty good about. Like even if it's not perfect, like I have to feel like I'm like at least gotten close to where the book should start. And I have to have like a really good like structure. Like I need to be confident about like my major plot points.
Yeah, for me, it's just a matter of I have the whole thing outlined. Okay, let's go.
Yeah, for me, it's first sentences. Like, first sentence is very much, it's a sign to me that I've been thinking about it so much that I know the character's voice well enough to know how they want to start their story, which I'm never a huge fan of being like, my character decided where to start, because it's like, no, it's in my mind. I decided where. But it feels like I understand this character that I've created well enough to know how I want them to sound when they start their story.
It's interesting because for me, usually first sentence, it comes earlier in the outlining process, which was one of the really frustrating things about the book I just finished is I still like don't feel confident about the beginning because usually like the first sentence is like one of the really early things where I like know that I'm like starting to have a good idea more than just a concept. So
That's interesting. So moving on into drafting. So I'm going to start with something that I saw people talking about in the discussion section when we first got started, which is, are you a chronological drafter or an out of order drafter? Or have you done both?
chronological.
Same.
So
I occasionally will skip over like half a scene. Like if I can't figure out how to make a scene work, I'll be like, finish this later and let's move on to the next. But for the most part, I do it in order.
Yeah, I am allergic to not drafting in order. I don't know why. I would never condemn it for anyone else, but I can't wrap my mind around not.
For me, it's just that like each scene influences the next so much that like I don't know how to do it. Like I feel like it would be more jumbled and that would stress me out. So
well, like sometimes if I have an
people do
idea
it.
for a scene that's farther down the book, I'll just write it because I'm excited about it. But also because it's kind of like if I have that feeling, I'm like, oh, if I leave this for later, I'm not going to get the same feeling. Or I'm not going to get my point across like I know what I want to say right now. So even if I just have it, you know, you can always revise it later, but it mostly ends up being that way anyway, because as you write, like Emma said, it changes, the next is next, whatever. But even if I have an idea for a scene, if I don't write it, I'll like make really detailed bullet points or something and kind of keep that for later. But I've done both. Sometimes I'll just start and keep going, and other times it's like, no, I got to write the thing that's at the very end.
yeah, I've done both as well, but I found over time I've gone from jumping around to more chronological. But I do think it can help. Like Emma says, they're so connected that if you're not sure what happens next and you write the next thing, it makes it so much easier in your brain to fill in what that next scene is supposed to feel like. You have A and C, so B is more obvious once you know where you're going.
Like also the way that I usually will end up outlining is like I know a lot of like the major points, or I know the midpoint, or I know where I want certain scenes to go. So it does kind of work out like that if I write scene A and I write scene C, then I'm like, oh well, how do I link them? And then it's kind of easier to write that because I'm like, oh, I'm just writing the in between. Like I don't have to write anything scary or new and exciting because I already have those like main points, so I can just link them, and then that's like, oh yeah, no worries.
Yeah, I think I definitely.
Doggo.
I'm just being dog doorman all night. So.
I will skip around a little. Like if most of my books have between 2 and 3 point of view characters. And so sometimes I'll sit down to write and it's like, well, next is character A's point of view. And I'm just really not feeling that. Like I'm not in the right headspace to be that person right now. Sometimes I'll just put like a little scene break symbol and then just start the next scene. And then I'll go back the next day or whatever and do that one. But I don't think I ever do like really big, like, oh, I'll jump way far ahead and write something.
I will say I have I have one time I did like write the last scene of the book when I was only maybe a quarter or halfway through, because kind of like Rachel was describing, I had like a really strong idea for it and I knew the like tone and the mood I wanted for it, and so I wanted to capture that while it was like fresh in my brain. And then I did end up actually changing the scene quite a bit, but I was glad that I like had that feeling there and some of the like dialogue, because I had like certain bits of dialogue for that scene in my head. And so I was glad I did that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I will say like the one thing, like I don't write out of order very often at all. Because I found that for me at least, I run into the issue of, even in my process of like intensely outlining, if I go through that outline too many times in total before I start, I'll be like halfway through the actual manuscript and then I'll be forgetting who knows what type of thing. So I'll be like, oh, character A will make this offhanded remark about this. And then I'll be like, oh, no, wait, this secret hasn't been revealed yet. So she wouldn't even know that. But because my brain has been so focused on this outline, I was already accidentally 2 scenes ahead or whatever. So I feel like if I did start trying to write out of order, that would all just kind of blend into a mush of I wouldn't know where I was at any time in the manuscript.
Maybe it's just because I've written a lot of essays in my life and I'm continuing to do so, that when you have a general idea for a thesis, it's just like write it down, write everything down, do all your research, make some paragraph. Like the way that I write essays is like I group things together into paragraphs, and then my revisions are I just put all the paragraphs together and find a way to link them or move them around or like make them make sense. So I guess that happens in my writing too, where I'm just like, we'll put them all together and then we'll link them later.
Oh yeah. So let us know in the discussion section if you have anything about any of these topics that you want us to like talk about more. Otherwise, we're just gonna keep moving through. So in the drafting stage, it's inevitable you're going to hit a point where you're like, ugh, why though? So what do you guys do? Do you have like a big thing that's you're like, this is my cure-all if I'm feeling stuck, but I'm trying to hit a deadline or I'm trying to just finish? What's the thing that you do that helps you overcome writer's block the most often?
Changing up something about my process is usually really helpful. So whether that's writing in a different location than usual, like I'm really missing writing in coffee shops right now, because that's really helpful for me. It's just changing up where I am or like how I'm writing. So sometimes I'll switch to writing by hand, and that'll help me to kind of get the ideas down. I think because for some reason writing it out by hand feels like a lower stakes thing than typing it in a document, even though both can be changed. But but I feel like it can be messy if I'm just like writing it out by hand. So if I'm having trouble figuring out a scene, that can help for me.
I do the exact same thing. I am also a huge coffee shop writer, so I change of area. Literal burst. But a change of scenery will sometimes help. And then I also do the same thing where if I'm really stuck, even though I do have an outline, my outline is more like vague and general. So I'll get out a notepad and actually write down like blow by blow what's going to happen next in the scene I'm writing. And there is something about like having it down, like writing it down with pen and paper that feels quite different than on your screen. And that usually gets things going again for me. So.
Mm-hmm. Since I do embrace the chaos a little bit more in drafting, the thing that usually trips me up is that I've realized something big needs to change. And so now I'm trying to get them shifted into the right spot. That way it's like less work down the road. So for example, I had this like subplot in the current work in progress where they were going to be like trying to help the ghosts, because that's a super cliche, obvious first choice when someone hears a ghost is you try and help them or whatever. And I realized like that's really cliche and I don't want to do that in this book. And so I was trying to shift everyone out of that and back into the right area of, okay, well now we need to be here. We need to be, okay, instead of doing this, we're going to do this other thing. And I was just getting so stuck trying to do it. And so I will literally just write in the document, just like a paragraph of, okay, and we're going to do this, 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 and this, and we're going to end up chapter 23. So like in my most recent one, I wrote, there was a groan from the other room that cut the rest of this scene short because it's obviously going nowhere. Chapter 23. And for some
Bless.
reason, that like shakes it out of my head, and I'm able to just be like, okay, now we can just jump and keep going. I'm reading through the discussion section right now. Penumbra Mind said there's a coffee shop sounds video on YouTube that my friend has been listening to because she can't get out. Big fan of that. I've been just like driving my car and then parking in a parking lot somewhere that's like abandoned and just writing in my car because it's like I need to get out of my house, but I'm not gonna go in public somewhere. Let's see. ATW 2006 said, my last story, I didn't know I had more points of view until the first draft of one character was done. And it was actually easier for me to write the whole thing as one person and then do the other. So how long does it typically take you to do a draft? Let's say average, because obviously every draft is going to take a little bit different amount of time. But if you had to like look at the drafts you've written in the past, what's like the average amount of time that it takes you? I'll go first. It takes like 2 to 3 months for me to finish a first draft, maybe 2. I usually write like one that takes a really short amount of time and then one that takes a little longer each year.
I'd say normally it's probably about 6 months for me, but I've written a book in a little bit shorter than that, and I've written a book that took like 1.5 years. So it definitely depends on, of course, how long the book is, but also just like how complex it is and what's going on in my life. So
Yeah, I'm trying to do averages in my head and and remembering why I barely pass math. But I want to say like 6 to 8 months, somewhere in there. Again, some shorter, some longer, but it's a lengthier process.
Oh, my cat just snuck in. Hold on.
That's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, like a month to 2 months on average. I've done it in 2 weeks. I don't think anything that's taken me more than 3 months, I've never finished.
Mine is like a month and a half, but then that means a lot of revisions, which take longer than that. So
Yeah. What would you guys advise people trying to set a finish by date if they don't know like what their average is? You know, we all kind of know our average because we've all written a lot of books. What advice would you give to someone who is trying to figure out goal dates?
when you're calculating your average, don't be unrealistic. I'm the type of person that's like, yeah, I'm going to write this many words in a day because this is what I did last Tuesday and it was such a good day. Well, not every day is going to be such a good day. And so I realized I was setting completely unrealistic goals for myself. Like last month, I was like, I'm going to try to write 4,000 words a day and then I'll be done a whole book in just a month and etc. And you have to take life into account. So maybe like add up things for your like medium days or your not as good days and like round down and then set a reasonable goal so you don't start feeling bad about yourself as you're falling behind, because that's inevitably going to happen if you try to calculate for your best days.
What is that wonderful website that like gives you different amounts to write on every day? Like you can do it even, or you can like write more on weekends.
Oh, I've used it a ton.
It's so good.
Writing tracker website. Pacemaker.
Yes, Pacemaker is so great because you can like put in your deadline, how many words you want to write, and then give it a sense of your writing patterns. If you want to write the same amount every day, if you want to write a little bit more every day, so it like goes up to this big challenge, you kind of wean yourself onto it, or you want to start really big and slow down because you know you're going to lose steam, and it'll like calculate all of that out, and it will just keep adjusting for you based on whatever you actually do that day.
That's cool. Wow.
Another thing you could maybe do instead of setting like a big goal for the entire book is you could set a goal to like have the first like especially if you've like plotted out like major plot points, you could have like, I want to finish act 1, or I want to like reach the first plot point by this date, and kind of break it down. And then like as you go, you can see how long it's taking you, and that can help you adjust for later goals.
Yeah.
And,
Do you
like,
guys?
break-
Okay.
I guess it like break down even your medium or large goals into much smaller goals, because it's so much easier and more motivating when you can like cross things off your list. Because I feel like I'm going to use a video editing example here. Like, oh, if I have to film a Word Nerd video and I just put film Word Nerd video and it takes me 8 hours to do that, you know, because I have to set up, I have to get ready, I have to film, that's going to take a couple tries, then I have to upload my footage, then I have to do a rough cut, then a final cut, then upload it, whatever. So if I write all those things, like, you know, set up, film, take a break, edit, you know, whatever, like it feels so much better to me to be able to cross more things off that list instead of just having the one like Word Nerd video and seeing it not be crossed off for so long. And then finally being like, oh, I've only done one thing because I only filmed a Word Nerd video. So like having those smaller goals, or like, oh, I want to get to the end of Act 1 by this day, or I want to introduce these characters and then I want them to go to a coffee shop and then I want something bad to happen. And then you can cross off as you're going. It kind of like makes you feel better, and then you'll be like, oh, I'm getting more done, and then be more motivated.
And you always know like what the next step is gonna be. Like, I'm gonna do this and then I'm gonna do that.
There's a really good video on this type of thing for like tracking your word count goals and like creating realistic goals on the Heart Breathing YouTube channel, Heart Breathings. And the video is called How to Create Realistic Goals for Your Writing. I was literally just watching it this morning, and she talks about like biting off more than she could chew, basically. And I was very much like, oh, how dare you call me out like this? But yeah, it's a really, really good video. How to create realistic goals for your writing.
Yeah. So do all of you set like a, I want to be finished with my draft by this date sort of goal? Or just like, or doing the steps, whether it's like big or small? Do you set date goals?
I set them, but I don't think I ever meet them. So
I set writing goals, but I don't think I set date goals. I don't say date-oriented goals.
Yeah.
So like, oh, today I want to write this scene, or oh, today I want to write until these characters discover this, or today I just want to work on some cool world building paragraphs. But I'm never like, oh, I have to have 4,000 words done by Tuesday. Like because then I'll get stressed out. And like Erin says, life happens.
Yeah, I never seem to like account for life happening when I set like a big goal to finish a book. And I don't think I don't usually set a goal like that when I first start writing the book, but when I'm like halfway through the book, I'll be like, okay, I want to finish it by this date. And then I never reach that. So yeah, it's easier to just be like, this is what I want to get done this week, or this is what I want to get done today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I definitely worked better when I had like those concrete goals, like when I was hardcore self-publishing all the time and I had a publishing schedule I had to keep. I definitely had goals because Amazon needed the book by a certain date, or they were going to lock me out of everything for all time or whatever. So that's definitely when I got the most done. And since I've taken that pressure off, I've stopped writing anything at all. So
Yeah, I set daily word count goals, but I don't set date goals, so to speak. But if I hit daily word count goals, I usually have an idea of when I will finish it. But like I said before, I don't actually hold myself to any set date. That is when I'm doing it by myself. Like if the publisher is waiting for a book, then you don't really have a choice.
Yeah, I was gonna say, how has that changed since like getting deals?
It's changed a lot. It used to feel a lot less like pressure, and like at this point I have a deadline of August 10th for my edits. So yes, exactly my thought. So it's like I have to dedicate a certain amount per day to my edits. Like there is no wiggle room for that. And I've also discovered that I really have to pace myself, and I do have to do a bit of math here, and I have to calculate how much I can do per day. So I don't end up inevitably on the last like 2 days panicking and putting in like a till midnight schedule, because I've had to do that before when I kind of go too easy on myself in the week ahead and I'm like, oh, I'm doing pretty good, and I haven't calculated things. And then I end up really hating myself. So
I
There
love that pressure. I love having a deadline like that where I'm like, I got to do 2 10K Saturdays and then I'm going to hit because I know I can do a 10K Saturday. So, like, I really like
Oh,
that.
Wow.
I like having pressure, but I don't like pressure just before. Like if it's like a week before and I'm like, oh, okay, gotta do like 6 days straight of like really intense, that's fine. But if I have 1 day left and it's like down to the midnight deadline, I'm like,
And
nope,
someone's
don't
waiting.
like
Oh,
this.
Yeah.
Yeah, my ADHD brain thrives on those kind of deadlines, but I can't trick myself into thinking deadlines are real if I've just made them. It has to be an actual deadline.
I feel like that's very true.
That's where writing friends come in handy. I'm a big fan of like telling people to shame me if I set a deadline and then don't meet it. Because that works for me. Like that definitely doesn't work for everyone, but that's really motivating for me. So like,
shame.
yeah. So like in my last video, I talked about how like my goal is to finish this draft that I'm working on by the end of Camp NaNoWriMo, which is 4 days from now. And I'm on track right now to do that. And like, I don't think I would be on track to finish it right now if I hadn't told the internet that I wanted to finish it by then.
Mhm.
Yeah, I especially gets to a point where like I have learned that there's only so many times you can ask your editor for an extension without feeling really horribly terrible. So like the last time I asked for one and this time I'm like, nope, can't do it this time. Gotta hit the goals this time.
We had a comment from Nevermind that said 10K Saturday sounds awesome. It is. And speaking of, the Word Nerds are teaming up with a bunch of other vloggers on YouTube this upcoming Friday for the last day of Camp NaNoWriMo. It's going to be a huge vlog hop of people doing virtual write-ins with the aim of like a 10K Friday or however many words you need to hit your goal. Cat.
So that's the sign language for cat. I realized it looks like a mustache, but this sign language for cat because whiskers.
Going
Anyways,
for 10K day.
Yes.
the muse has visited you.
News. Yes, you have all been blessed now.
Yeah.
But yes, we will be here from 12:30 Eastern to 2:30 Eastern, I believe, and we'll be writing in. I'll post on our Twitter and Facebook, and I'll make the event on here and everything, so it'll be really obvious. But we're going to be here on Friday, and there are going to be writers all over YouTube on Friday who are just writing all day, hoping to get all the words in. So we hope you'll join us for that. Debbie mentioned Scrivener has a function that allows you to set how many words you want to write by when, and then each day it adjusts how much you have to write to get it done on time. And it's a really good function. Definitely recommend. Did anyone have any final thoughts on drafting before we move into revising? Okay, so the third, final, possibly most daunting stage of all of it is revisions. So you've got that first draft finished and it feels like you should be like, yeah, I did the thing. I'm all done forever. But no, you have to make the book look pretty and ready to go. So my first question is, do you guys take a break / how long of a break do you take between drafting and starting revisions on average?
I do not.
Nope.
I usually take like a week to a month. Sometimes
I think
it's
I'm
like
the same.
3 months. Sometimes it's like half of a week. I don't know.
Yeah, I usually tell myself 2 weeks, and it sometimes becomes longer than that.
I feel like by the time I finish drafting, I have a pretty good idea of where I have dropped the ball and what needs
Yeah.
to be edited. So,
I'm definitely better off when it's fresh.
See, I like the distance a little bit, at least like a week or two, because then it's not so like the whole book itself is not so fresh. And then I feel like I can go in and be like, oh, this doesn't work. Oh, this doesn't work. Fix all these things, cut this out.
Yeah, I can
feel
like
less
take a
fresh.
step back emotionally and then
Yeah.
look at it a little bit more critically.
But if the book has taken me longer to draft, then I am more likely to be like, well, I don't remember the beginning anyway, so let's just move right in. Nevermind said, this is the part where you take your inner editor out of the closet and remove all the duct tape. Yup. So I was wondering if each of you could do like a really rough overview of what your revisions process looks like. Just start to finish, like how many rounds do you take? Are you looking for anything in particular versus doing like an overarching revision? Just
I don't mind starting because I have a pretty regular revisions process by now. I have it down to like beats where I'm like, this is the part where I freak out about things.
Did schedule that in. Yep.
Schedule the existential crisis in. Yes.
Yeah.
So usually once I'm done, I do not let it sit, even though I probably should. But because I have been either I've got track comments on in the document to begin with, because usually about halfway through I'm drafting, I'm like, oops, I dropped this ball. This character hasn't come back in. So I'm making notes as I go often because that's in the place of me going back and actually editing as I go. Because I don't want to do that because that will definitely not let me get the rest of the draft done. So by the time I'm finished, I have like a complete set of notes, usually places I know that I've failed essentially and want to go back and fix. So I take that list and I then print off the whole manuscript because for some reason at this stage, it feels better to shift into a different format for my brain to kind of like take that step back. And I'll often change the font as well. And then, because that kind of makes it like, oh, did I write this? I don't know. And then I'll write and I'll actually put all of my notes as much as I can into the margins while I'm writing after doing it on like a rough sheet. So all of my crazy scribbles are there. Because sometimes I'll have to brainstorm something or whatever. Then once I have that master list, I'll transfer it over into the margins because I usually print it off with track changes. And then I've just put all of those into the actual manuscript. And then usually by then, it's a few weeks later and it's ready for beta readers afterwards. So, and it's always developmental edits, no line edits yet, because a lot of time I'm moving scenes around and stuff.
yeah.
See, I tend to line edit as I go, and I know that's like a big no-no, but that's just
It's revisions.
my English major brain just can't stop.
I think that's fine. Like, especially if you see something that like really bugs you and you know you're going to see it a bunch of times more, you just change it.
Well, like also, I feel like if you said like you don't do line edits because you might remove a whole scene, but I feel like when I'm rereading it, if I'm like, this really isn't working, no matter how many times I change the grammar of this sentence, I'm going to cut it anyway. So I will only have like line edited like half of it, and then I'm like, never mind. And then I just kind of either delete it or like write another note of like, gotta rewrite this one, and then move on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I usually do a pretty quick read through of it, like almost to the point of skimming. Like I just want to get the plot and the character arcs down. And then right after that, I will write a little summary of every chapter on a note card. And I look at those note cards and figure out, okay, what are the broad structural changes that need to happen? And I typically do this like by character or by plot hole. That way, if I'm changing it on a note card, it feels less messy in my head. Because it's like, oh, I'll just stick a Post-it note. Like these things are changing in this arc. And each like character or problem will get a Post-it note. And so if something in that chapter has to change, I write what's going to change on the Post-it note, stick it to the index card, and then I have a big stack of things that at the end I can just go chronologically through and just like type in all of the changes as I go. And that's like my hard outline guidebook to fixing things. And then I do a pass after that for like making sure that there aren't loose threads / if there's any egregious sentence problems. I'll fix those before sending to betas.
I totally do the index card thing too. That's like my solution if I get stuck and I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing now at this point. I'll write out all the scenes on index cards as well.
Emma or Kelly, do you have any revisions, thoughts?
I like haven't done quite enough revisions to have like a really nailed down process. Like I'm like the opposite of Erin, where I'm like, let's just see how this goes. But I definitely like as I go, I'm making a lot of notes of things because like I realize when I've like dropped a plot line or a character or something, and so I'll make notes about things that I need to fix later. or else I'm just gonna, like, by the time I finish, I'll just be like overwhelmed and like, I don't know. But so if I've like written down some things as I've gone, then that gives me somewhere to start. And I do a read through, I make note cards, and then I like to, when it comes to making changes, I like to start like with the biggest picture and move down. So like starting with like really big structural plot changes, like moving scenes around, writing new scenes, taking scenes out, and kind of like making the new structure of the plot if I need to. And then moving into like fixing character problems, and like smaller problems with like some of the subplots, and like going scene by scene afterwards.
Yeah. It's honestly been really different book to book for me. Like there hasn't been a consistent process. I've never really done like a pass for this, a pass for this, a pass for this, because I know with each pass I'm gonna pay less attention to the little details. Like it's all gonna start to blur together. So if I see it's broken, I'll fix it then.
That's actually exactly why I stopped doing that, because I used to be the person who was like, I'm going to do a pass for characters, I'm going to do a pass for plot, and then I was having the same issue. I'd be like, I can't read through this manuscript another time for something else. So I started doing the thing where I'm like, I'm making notes as I go, and then I'm going to write them all in at the same time, so I don't have to read through 62 different times.
I do think for me, going through it pass by pass, I used to do that a lot more than I do now, and it was extremely useful for learning how to diagnose what's wrong, because I don't think that comes naturally to like anyone. You know, it's like really hard to look at this thing that you've just worked so hard on and be like, okay, how about I rip it apart and make it way worse so that I can make it better. And I learned a lot about that by going like step by step through Susan Dennard's Guide to Revisions, which I have just put the link to in the discussion section. I am such a big fan of it. I don't think I would know how to revise without it. And it's part of why I love revisions so much, is because Susan Dennard is a scientist, and like she doesn't treat writing like it's some mythical, oh, well, you know, the muse just came to me and I did the thing. It's like, no, like I did the thing because I did A, B, and C.
Don't bash the muse.
Not the cat. Yeah, I'm definitely a big fan of demystifying the process, because, you know, everything is science. And books are definitely
that's
no
close
exception.
to math.
Can you walk around now saying that you're really good at math?
I mean, story math, yeah. I definitely feel like I know the things, the components that will make a compelling story. Whether or not I execute it great every time is a whole other thing, but I definitely know all the equations. So at what point in this process do you said that at the end of your like 3 weeks or whatever, typically you finish your revisions, Erin, and you bring in betas. Is that similar for the rest of you, timing wise, versus like how many rounds of revisions you do before bringing in betas or sending to an editor?
I tend to lean betas as soon as I feel it's remotely good enough. Like I'd rather have eyes on it sooner rather than just like the end final, oh, I think this is good enough, let's see what someone thinks. Of like, I want that like early feedback of like, I love being able to just send a very rough draft and tell me what's wrong with it now, rather than after I've looked at it for 18 years.
Yeah, I'm like trying to get over the perfectionism of feeling like it needs to be really good before it goes to betas, because I think sometimes, like I might have ideas of what needs to be fixed and what needs to be different, but like I might be wrong, because like I'm too close to it. And so like allowing someone else to look at it and like either confirm that things aren't working or be like, no, that does work, it doesn't need to be fixed. Because sometimes like I just feel very unsure about what I actually need. Like I'm like, I just should just throw away the whole draft and start over again. And so being able to have like other people to let you know if it actually needs to be thrown away or not.
I think you have to have beta readers that you trust, like our writing group, for example, or the Werners. You have beta readers that you trust not to get hung up on all of the rougher stuff. So you are able to send it to them when it's in the, like, you should be able to read it, obviously, but it's still in the rougher stages so that you can maybe like sit down and brainstorm the issues together. So you don't have to tear it apart and start all over again. You can, you know, work with them and help evolve it as you're doing further edits, you know.
And I think it's just, it can be really helpful to have earlier eyes on it so that you're not doing like all these extensive revisions and something about like the bones of the story isn't working, because then you're just going to have to go back and tear up the whole story later. So I'd rather do that earlier than later.
See, I tend to give someone my outline. Like I'll usually brainstorm the outline with someone before I write it. And so I do tend to focus a little bit more in the revisions process on like, I want it to be pretty clean, because I don't want to get a note back that is like, you should fix this thing when I already knew I should fix that. Like I want to be blindsided, like hurt me. Yeah, so I tend to spend a little bit more time on the revisions end before I send it to someone. But that probably is because I do go over the outline with someone. And so a lot of those like plot shortcomings that would be really quick to point out have hopefully, ideally been pointed out earlier, and I've already known to fix them. But
I think like the further you get into your writing career, it kind of seems like the earlier you get comfortable letting people see things, because you realize that it actually is really helpful to catch issues early on.
Yeah.
Where like when you first start writing, you're like, I have to have like I think I very much had the attitude, and a lot of people have this attitude early on of like, it needs to be the best draft I could possibly make before I show it to anybody else. And I don't think that's necessarily true.
No, I definitely thought that earlier on writing too, that like, oh, well, it has to be absolutely perfect. Like I can't improve it anymore before I send it to someone.
So you can't waste somebody else's time, but then you're just like wasting your own time.
It's like, I know what my friends are doing with their free time.
Well, exactly. And it was the same with me. Like I was like, this has to be as perfect as I can make it before I sent, because it was like strangers essentially were beta reading when I was still trying to find beta readers, right? And then when you get, you know, to be better friends with these beta readers and you're growing and, you know, working on stories together and getting better, like it's different, because you're like, I'm not embarrassed anymore to send you like maybe my second draft or something. Maybe not the first one still, but and then you can
make my first draft. It's rough.
We had to for a really long time. So
we read each other's fan fiction drafts when we were 12.
You're bonded for life when we read each other's fan fiction. That's the rule.
Yeah, it's a blood oath, but of the internet.
Exactly.
I'm interested too. I feel like a lot of this idea is kind of stemmed in the fact of like, when you're trying to get an agent, you have to make it as clean as possible, because they won't sign you if it's not as clean as possible. And so then you're like, oh, well, I need to get it super clean before I send it to anyone, and then even cleaner before I send it to agents. And I, in my own personal experience, found it really interesting when I had an agent that it was like, oh, she wants to see like first draft stuff. So I'm curious, like, how has that process changed, Erin, since getting agent and book deal? And then Kelly, you are our prolific self-published author. How has that changed, if it's changed at all, with working with like professional editors and stuff?
It's different for me because every agent's gonna be different, but mine is not someone that I send my very rough. Like I have a friend who sends her agent literally everything. So she'll send chunks to her agent as she's writing it. And then they workshop it together. So every agent is going to be like a different level of editorial, and mine is fairly, but she's not at that level. I do that with like you guys. We'll kind of workshop things as it's going along. So with my agent, my drafts are usually like second or third drafts. They're like relatively clean. So after they've gone through beta readers and stuff, like I kind of like the idea actually of sending chapters as you go, so that your agent can say like, hey, this is good, or like, hey, this is not working. But I will send her outlines. Or I will send her the pitch of the idea so she can be like, this isn't marketable or it is, before I start. With editors, it's been quite different, because like, and again, every editor is going to be different, but with my editor from Penguin Random House, there often isn't time to do anything other than like a first draft, maybe like a second skim through if I'm lucky. But at this point, like the story's been so hammered out, like I know everything that's going to happen, and a lot of time it's her. She's asking for developmental edits, so I've written it, I've read it over, and then I send it, which sometimes does feel weird. It took a while to get used to, but copy edits come later, so it's not as big of a deal. But yeah, it was weird. It took a while to get used to the idea of sending like fairly rough stuff to a professional editor. I was like, I don't know about this, but they're used to it, so everything goes so fast. Pretty much, you have a deadline, and you don't get to send it to beta readers or go over it a million times. So,
for me, working with professional editors on the self-publishing side, it's the very last thing I do. Of like, I'm paying for it. I want to catch as much as I can ahead of time, because then I'm freeing the editor up to find things that I would never have noticed. Whereas if it's still a ridiculously sloppy draft, they're going to be so bogged down by that stuff and cleaning that up that they're not going to catch the other thing. So it really is trying to get the most impact out of what you've paid for in order to get a really clean draft at the end. So that's when I'm combing over things as much as I can the night before and just trying to find every little thing and then sending it off. But on those, I've only really worked with editors for the copy edits and up kind of thing, not big picture.
And do you get in touch with an editor before you've finished? Like, does that give you a bit of a deadline, knowing that you have?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's definitely hard to find an established editor, or like I've pretty much worked with the same editor through most of what I was doing. They're not going to be available as soon as you're ready to go. It may be a month or two out, so you want to let them know ahead of time. A lot of editors are very used to, okay, I'm going to send you the first half now on the deadline, but then I need like a couple more days for the second half. But beyond that, it really is, they have someone else to move on to. So it's a pretty hard deadline.
Yeah. And Erin, with books that aren't under contract, but that you're sending to your agent, does your agent help you pick a deadline for those, or is it pretty?
No, she's generally pretty open with that, which is nice. She will sometimes be like, hey, we want to send this, say, out on submission by October because there's a big book fair going on and she wants to try to pitch it then. So sometimes we might have like a deadline that's like, can you get this to me by September or the early half of September so we can look it over once. But if it's not under actual contract, it's much more of like a loose deadline, which is good. So,
yeah. So having beta readers obviously takes, or sending it to an editor, agent, or whatever, obviously takes some of the control out of your hands. Do you guys set completion goals after you've sent it to a beta reader, or do you wait until you've heard back to be like, okay, now I want to be done by this time period?
Beta readers can be so unpredictable.
Do you have do you talk with beta readers beforehand? Like, how long will it take to hear from you? Or is it like you built the relationship up so you kind of roughly know how long it's going to take?
Mostly it's you guys now. So
Yeah,
That's true.
you guys are all pretty good at getting back. So
when it's not you guys, it's always been people I'm swapping with, and we're usually going chapter by chapter, more or less. But like you can kind of like, well, I've done a bunch of your chapters, nudge, nudge. But or I don't have any right to nudge because I haven't finished her stuff either. So a lot of beta relationships have gone like that, of a little bit at a time, and it's worked out pretty nicely.
Yeah. Then checking my notes here, make sure I'm not missing anything. So once you've heard back from betas, what does your revisions process look like? Is it the exact same thing all over again, or does your revisions, the amount of time it takes, change? Anything like that?
Depends on the
I-
notes.
what did you say, Kelly?
Depends on the notes of what the beta readers think the issues are. But that's where I love especially because I don't get a lot of that from editors, of just reading through the comments. And then I'll just, like, I don't usually, like, I'll read their overall notes and then I'll just start fixing what they think is broken, just line by line.
Yeah, for beta readers, I usually make sure that I at least have about 3. And that way, like, if one of them disagrees with the other, sometimes the third is like the tiebreaker, so I can figure out, like, or what I think as well. And then I'll kind of like combine their notes and then make a kind of a master list. I'm all about the lists. And then I can kind of go from that. And often I will, and I'm the same with editor notes as well. I have to like give myself a bit. So that is when I step back, like I'll read everything and then be like, okay, I need to like step away from the project. And it's usually to like let it sink in almost. I'm the same way with my agent or my editors or my beta readers. I'm like, because a lot of the time, like, I don't know if I would say sensitive, although sometimes with editor, yes. But it's more like I need time to digest it,
Yeah.
So
I think especially if the notes don't line up with like things you already had in mind, so if it's something that you have to think about because you didn't realize it was an issue.
yeah, blindsides you and you're like, I need a minute.
Yeah. And you have to figure out what you're going to do about it. You're like,
Exactly.
how does this affect the entire book? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think I also like to take a step back, not like a huge one. For me, the break is much shorter between getting beta feedback and revising than like finishing the first draft and revising. But I do like to take a day or two just to like, whether I've been blindsided by something or not, to just like sit with it and let my brain kind of untangle things. And yeah, because you know what your weaknesses are. I always know I'm going to get a bunch of comments on description, and that's like, okay, that's helpful. I can go line by line for that. I always know there's going to be a couple plot holes, maybe a character arc that needs smoothing. And so most of the time I've been thinking about those things already while beta readers have had it. And so then by the time I get the notes, it's like, okay, I just need a couple days to put all the pieces together now so that I can jump back in. And I do the note card thing again, but the revisions tend to go much faster the second time around. So like my first round of revisions after writing a first draft might take like 6 to 8 months or something, but I could finish the next one in a couple months, not just because it's cleaner, but also because I'm really hyped because it's almost done. What does the timeline look for you guys on average of full revisions?
Oh gosh.
It depends on how bad the book is.
Yeah. Very much. It also depends, like, if I'm getting an edit letter from one of my editors, it will often be like a 6-page edit letter. And that's what I usually like schedule some crisis time for me to just lie on the floor and cry. So that can make things take like a really long time. So yeah, I think it depends, on the basis of like each book, right? And how extensive the edits are. Sometimes you're rewriting the whole entire thing.
Oh, I've had to do that once. Never again. I hope I never have to do it again.
And like, because I don't like have an agent or an editor, and I'm not like trying to publish my books like immediately, and I have like a whole other career and school and stuff going on, like I have the luxury in a way that like I can do a round of revisions and then I can put the book away for a while and write something else, and come back to it later and see how I feel about it later if it's something that's worth taking more time on. So I've done that sometimes.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. For me, it's always just been however long's left before that deadline. That's how long I've got. So
yeah. I think on average for me, it can take around 6 to 8 months, depending on how long it takes to get beta reader feedback, because sometimes that can take a couple months. But but I really like revisions. I would much rather spend like 8 hours doing revisions than 8 hours drafting.
Oh, what's the matter with you?
I love it.
I don't understand.
We had a couple questions. Penumbra Mine asked, do you always pick betas in your genre, or do you select at least one from a different genre to get a more unbiased opinion?
I generally stick to somebody who at least writes in a similar genre, because in my past experience, having had somebody who doesn't read YA at all, for example, ends up being bad feedback, frankly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it has to be someone who at least reads occasionally
100%.
the type of book you're writing and like likes that type of book.
Mhm.
Because if they hate it, then it's just not going to be useful.
Yeah, it's like those readers that review and they're like, I hate YA, so this one sucked. And you're like, what? Why?
Well, like someone that writes or reads in the same genre is gonna just know their stuff better, and they're gonna know what to look for, and gonna be able to call you out if you're doing something wrong or if you're doing something right.
Yeah. We had another question. What do you do when you feel like your beta or editor isn't even really reading the book you wrote? Do you request a reread or find another person?
Find someone else. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, there is a dog again.
I think unless someone offers a reread, I'm typically not gonna ask them to do it. I'm not sure how that works with like an editor that you're paying. But for like a beta reader, unless they've said like, hey, I'll read this again, I'm not gonna ask them to do it again.
Yeah,
They've
even
already
if I'm
suffered
paying
enough.
them, I've paid them for that pass. I won't work with them again if I found that they haven't given the feedback I'm looking for. But
You can almost also guarantee that is, I mean, sometimes maybe on the off chance, but that's almost never going to happen if you've got a contract for a book and it's a professional editor from the publisher editing for you, or suggesting for you, I should say, because you should have talked about the major developmental edits before you sign. Like almost always you're going to have a phone call with that editor and they're going to say, here are the major things I'm thinking of changing. And you make sure you're on the same page before you sign with that publisher. So you might have little things that you'd butt heads on and you're absolutely allowed to say, no, thank you. I don't think that lines up with my vision for the story. But like major changes, you should have talked about beforehand. So.
It's similar when you're signing with an agent for like your first book. They will tell you on the phone what their vision is for edits. And if they don't, you should ask about it because they have a vision for your edits already.
Yeah, they should tell you. I would be concerned if they didn't.
That would be a red flag for sure.
Yeah. I had a phone call at one point with an agent who wanted an R&R, and it was on Emmeline Black, of course. And she said, wanted to change the entire thing and it would have been a full rewrite, which obviously I'm not opposed to, but her idea for it I just did not like. I didn't like any of the changes. I didn't like what she would have changed about the world, and so I basically just said thank you, okay, and then emailed her later and went, I don't think that this is going to work. So even if you are like, I want an agent, it's important for you to be on the same page about things because they might do that to every manuscript you write. So
all right. Does anyone have any final tips, like your best tip for getting to the end of this writing a book process? Like the thing you always have to tell yourself when you're like, oh no, am I ever going to do it again?
Remember why you were excited about it.
yeah,
I like Megan's of getting people to know what your goals are and holding you accountable. You don't have to be in it by yourself.
Definitely have beta readers waiting for it. Like if you can tell people and you have friends that are excited for it and are demanding it, aka Megan nagging Emma until she has her manuscript. Yeah, that's the perfect thing to kind of propel you. And also like make note of when you have these like little mini crises, like realizing that this is part of the process, being like, I don't know how to write. I forgot everything that was in my brain up till now. And just kind of like, even if you have to write that down and be like, hey, I always panic at the halfway point. And then just being able to go back and like, that's why I keep a writing journal. So I can go back and be like, oh yeah, this is totally normal. And I've always gotten through it and I will continue to get through it. And then don't forget to reward yourself when you're done. You wrote a friggin' book. That's huge. So do something for yourself.
We had in the discussion section, ATW 2006 said, when I get feedback, I always find it comforting to think of the time Hans Christian Andersen got a bad review and just laid down in the mud and cried. If Hans Christian Andersen can do it, you can do it.
Yeah.
Everyone lay in the mud and cry and then finish your book.
Yeah.
I haven't laid in the mud yet, so I guess
You're doing better than Hans Christian Andersen.
There's been no mud involved yet.
Yeah. And of course, we at the Word Nerds are always here for you. We're rooting for all of you in your publishing journeys, whatever those journeys may look like. Does anyone have any final thoughts?
Penumbra Mine said, chocolate cake for all.
Yes.
Yes, agreed.
Yes, an excellent final thought.
Mhm.
Don't forget to please like and subscribe if you liked us and want to be subscribed to us. We've got videos on Tuesdays and Thursdays and live chats every Sunday, except for this week we've got a bonus live write-in on Friday from 12:30 to 2:30 Eastern Time, I believe. We're going to be writing all the words, so hopefully you'll join us for that. Next Sunday is going to be movie night because we realized like 3 days ago that this was supposed to be movie night, but we'd already set this topic and we're excited about it. So next Sunday, we are going to be talking about our movie night pick for quarter.
Three.
Oh my God.
I know. Oh God. What happened?
No. I'm going to go lay in the mud and cry. We're going to watch Hamilton and talk about it. So we hope you'll join us for that as well.
And what is our movie night?
Hamilton. It's on Disney Plus. Is that what it's called? Disney Plus. We hope to see you all then. And yeah, thank you so much for being here. Goodbye.
Bye.